Hi, I'm Tina Nawrocki. I'm a 2D animator, and I've been working in the video game industry for about 10 years now. And I was an animator on the video game Cuphead. So I studied illustration back in Montreal, and there was this one tiny little animation course. I always loved to draw. I painted a lot when I was a kid. I have some paintings still in my apartment actually that I painted when I was 14 and 13. All oil paints, traditional kind of masters type of looks. And then I took this one animation course, and I loved theater. And when I saw this, it was drawing and acting put together at once. It was love, and I could never stop. And that's when I started animating, and I got a job in video games right out of this college program, working as a Flash animator. So 2D animation, but it was, with rigs on the computer. And I did a lot of work in Montreal, and at some point I decided I want to get back to, my favorite thing, which is classical animation, animating on paper. So I moved to Toronto. I went back to school as a mature student. People didn't know how old I was for a while, but then the cat came out of the bag. So I did 2 years at Sheridan College animation just to get back into the roots and the stuff that I love to do. And then Studio MDHR found me online. They saw my pencil test. They saw that I loved doing 2D animation in my free time, and they hired me. And I was, one of those kids that, every time a new Disney movie or a DreamWorks movie back in the golden age of 2D, Jungle Book came out, Robin Hood was one of my favorite movies when I was growing up. I got really into Miyazaki films from Studio Ghibli when I learned about that, and then I was obsessed with all of it. What's funny is for a long time, I didn't even think that I was capable of doing any of that. I was just a fan, and I loved drawing and painting and color and stuff like that. And I loved acting. And then when I took a class for the first time and gave it a try, I really, really enjoyed it. And so those influences over the years of watching all that, really helped me out when I started working as an animator. If you hate acting, you shouldn't be animating, because you have to feel what the characters are feeling. It's very much about the emotion. And I had one amazing course called Acting for Animation, which was taught by a theater professor, and he was teaching the young animators what you have to feel. And we analyzed characters from Iron Giant and being like, what is this mother feeling? What was her past? What makes her feel these emotions at this moment? And you have to really think about it. And if you don't think about it, your animations become stiff and just kind of sad and lifeless, and people don't connect. So if you don't like acting, don't animate. Just draw stuff, that's fine. I think each animation genre is a tool. The artistry is the same. You can have amazing, heartfelt moments in 3D as well as in 2D. I really like the humanity that 2D gives to animation. You have a line drawn by a person, which is not perfect. I find that 3D takes a little away from that grit and that humanity, but you can still have glorious, amazing, heartfelt performances in 3D, or 2D, or stop motion, or any other animation medium. So Cuphead is very interesting. It's a run and gun style video game. So it's inspired by the retro type video games that all the 1980s kids were playing when they were growing up. It has couch co-op, so you could play it with a friend. And again, it simulates the 1980s where you have your buddy right next to you enjoying the gameplay. It's also really, really hard. And the two brothers, Chad and Jared Moldenhauer, who created the game, really wanted to make it a love letter to the genre of run and gun style games. So like Mega Man and the old Mario games, like platforming and then run and gun. What's really interesting about it and sets it apart from other video games is that it's based on a very specific animation style, the 1930s rubber hose era of animation. And Chad and Jared Moldenhauer were extremely adamant that we make it so that this video game was created as if it's created in the 1930s. So all animation was hand-drawn on paper, traditionally, as they used to do it in the 1930s. Everything was hand-inked by Maya Moldenhauer, who single-handedly inked the entire game. All the backgrounds were beautiful watercolor paintings, custom drawn and painted by a Toronto artist called Caitlin Russell. And even we had some maquettes, so some 3D objects in the game, which were created as if people made them in the 1930s. The Fleischer Studio was really well known for creating beautiful, beautiful maquettes. And they were actually hand carved by an artist here in Toronto and then stop motion animated. The music, likewise, was composed by a Toronto artist called Christopher Madigan, and he made ragtime jazz of the time, like to really marry that 1930s look. And it was a live band that recorded it. It wasn't a computer simulation, it was a real live band. There was a tap dancer that was part of it, a vocalist, solo pianist, and it's absolutely glorious, and it really gives you that nostalgia in gameplay as well as in look. So definitely, first of all, it was a lot of research. What's really nice about the two brothers that created the game, Chad and Jared Moldenhauer, is that they grew up watching these cartoons. We're not that old. They were kids in the 1980s, but their parents loved 1930s cartoons and had this crazy VHS tape collection of all the 1930s cartoons, Fleischer Brothers, Merry Melodies, Popeye, Betty Boop, all that kind of stuff. So the brothers watched them as kids and were more into that than the He-Man cartoons that were running on TV at the time. So when their friends came over, like, you have to watch this, it's so crazy, it's so cool, and they were really in love with the style. So they're kind of unsung historical experts on this style. So when I started working with Studio MDHR, I would get an assignment, and obviously I did a lot of research myself, watching cartoons from the time, getting art books which had concepts done by the artists of the era as well. But if ever I strayed away from that style, Chad and Jared would clock it right away and be like, no, this is looking too modern. Here's a great reference. Have you watched this episode of this cartoon? Take a look at how they did it there. And then I would frame by frame it, see every single drawing and try and adapt those techniques and that kind of stylistic approach to my own animations. I learned a lot about the 1930s style, especially since it was so musical. Right when the cartoon started, there was no sound, so they were all silent. And then music came in, and with Steamboat Willie, which is very, famous, was that it was the first cartoon synced to sound. And it was very dancey and had a lot of bobs and things like that to show off, like, look, Mickey is moving to sound, to music. So that kind of showing off this new technology made the cartoons very specific, made them very musical, which works really well with a video game, actually. So. Definitely what's really interesting is to see a young generation who never saw 1930s cartoons on TV, who would have to dig to see this style, who wasn't naturally exposed to this style. To them, it's so fresh and so new and so original, whereas the older generation have this amazing feeling of nostalgia to see it again. So it's really opening up an appreciation for the amazing work of those pioneer animators to a new generation. And also a huge interest in trying 2D animation. It looks different. There's a lot of 3D animation out there now in film as well as in video games. It's predominant. So when anything looks different, people get excited and interested. And so I've had many young people ask me, I want to get into this. I want to try 2D animation again. I don't think a lot of people are going to be as crazy as Studio MDHR is to create a completely hand-drawn, classically 2D animated game. My hope is that there'll be more 2D animated video games that maybe use software. Although if any other studio wants to make a traditional game the way we made it, I would love to see that. I do think it's creating excitement for whatever Studio MDHR does next. They've been asked a lot what's next in the pipeline. I have no idea. I can't speak for them. However, they did mention in an interview, so I'm going to repeat it here, that whatever they do next, it is going to be classically animated. So there's that to look forward to. Well, on a personal level, I was kind of really depressed about the state of 2D animation. I kept telling myself I was born 10 to 20 years too late, because I just cannot bring myself to put as much love to digital animation as I do on paper. It's my passion, and back in the day you had Disney hiring tons of young animators to work on these amazing features. You had small studios also working on commercials in 2D, like the old Tony the Tiger stuff and Charmin and all these awesome 2D projects, and they seem to be left, right, and center. And now we're very small, we're very specialized, and for a long time I felt like giving up and just being an animator in a different medium, on the computer or even going into 3D, but I kept coming back to 2D, to this traditional style. And in the end, I think it really paid off, because now I'm a niche market. You have these amazing old generation animators who are very sought after, but there's not a lot of them. and the new generation learns 3D animation and never picks up a pencil and paper and flips it. So I've become sought after because not many people do what I do anymore. And my hope is that seeing exciting projects like Cuphead or like Claws coming from Sergio Pablos' studio, seeing that again, people will get excited, and then there'll be this resurgence of new young animators in school who also want to focus on 2D animation and don't want to just go straight into 3D. Of course, in Japan, everybody still loves 2D, which is wonderful, but that's a really hard market to get into. And also, I tried learning Japanese once, it's not easy. So it's really beautiful to see Hayao Miyazaki coming out of retirement again, to do another extremely classically animated, beautiful film. So I'm really excited to see that. Definitely 2D animation has its own challenges, which make it hard to produce. Although I don't think any more expensive than 3D animation. I feel like we're on par budget-wise, or even cheaper to do 2D. What's interesting now is exactly the lack of talented young animators, because everybody goes into 3D. So there's a huge hole in the market. If you did suddenly tomorrow want to create a feature in 2D, you'd be at a loss to find young animators to fill all the positions. And they might not be at the skill level that the amazing animators at Disney or DreamWorks were when those turned to 3D studios. The other thing, which is really what people don't think about, even if you do find all the animators, kids don't want to be cleanup artists, and being a cleanup artist for 2D is a very specific job. It's different than an animator. It's almost more challenging to be a cleanup artist because you have to take these rough animations and then decide which is the final line, which is the line that's going to be on screen. And it's a very specific type of job which you have to have a love for. And even though you have some students who want to be animators, none of them think of going into cleanup. So you might find animators, but you won't find cleanup artists. So that's really difficult as well. When it comes to the digital world, that's, I guess, where you have that kind of bridge where people might be more interested to do that. There's an amazing program called TV Paint, which recently actually won an Annie at the Annie Awards for their contribution to the world of animation. And what's really great about that software is that a lot of 2D softwares are vector-based. So they're very crisp, the lines are very hard, and it looks very digital. It doesn't have that kind of feel of the old 2D style, whereas TV Paint is pixel-based, so it's like Photoshop versus Flash. Photoshop is pixel-based, you can have all these beautifully rendered, old-looking, charcoal-looking drawings, and TV Paint allows you to do that, allows you to give that feel of 2D animation without the paper and the animation desks and all that stuff. So I feel a lot of people may be drawn to that, which is like kind of a bridge between the two worlds. Even animators who love 3D and want to do 3D should all rigorously study 2D animation first. I think one of the things that people really forget when they're doing digital animation, like puppet rig animation or doing 3D animation, is to think about the energy behind the character, to think about the flow. And when you're doing 2D animation, you have to do that. You do a rough pass where you're not thinking of eyes and fingers and hair or anything like that. You're thinking about the main movement, just the flow of energy through a character, or even a special effect, the flow of energy. That's what you're animating first. And it makes the animation so strong. Also, because we're not distracted by the fact that our character's in a 3D world, we're working on a 2D plane to begin with. Strong silhouettes is something that 2D animators learn how to do really early on. You need to have a strong silhouette. Your posing needs to be beautiful, and you need to animate this flow of energy. A lot of young 3D animators who haven't tried 2D animation don't know these principles, or they get distracted by making the face look fun, or like, oh, I have to pose my fingers and all this stuff. No, like think of the grander scheme of things. And they don't think that way. One of my favorite anecdotes was told by one of my mentors, Samantha Youssef, for Kung Fu Panda, the last sequence, the giant fight sequence. It was animated by a 3D animator, and it looked mushy. It wasn't fun, and everybody was kind of sad looking at it. And then they brought in a classical 2D animator. I am probably going to say the wrong animator who did it, so I'm not going to say who did it. I'll have to do some research again. But one of the great classical 2D animators, he animated the whole thing on paper as if it was a classical 2D animation. it was glorious. It was awesome, it was snappy, it looked amazing, and they basically just put the 3D puppets over his drawings and made them look exactly the same. And if you watch that 2D sequence, you're like, wow, this is it. This is an animator who understands strong silhouettes, who understands line of action and energy flowing. And that's from being classically trained. So even if everything forevermore will be in 3D, every animator should learn 2D animation. Don't give up too early just because it's hard. When it's hard, it means it's worth it to do it right. A lot of people are kind of, they want to just jump into computers right away because the computer helps out. It does all your in-betweens, you know, it plans stuff out, everything's really easy to manipulate, you get results right away, you get a fully realized character doing things. Don't skip out on learning 2D. It is hard. It makes you think about what you're doing. It makes you plan things ahead. It makes you redo things and learn through sweat, blood, and tears, but it's really worth it. As I was saying, every animator should try 2D first, just to learn posing and line of action and energy flow and planning, you know, how to be focused, because you could tweak stuff over and over again on a computer and change it and change it and change it, and then it'll look good in the end, but how did you get there? Do you even remember what you did in order to get that? No. Whereas in 2D, you can't tweak things. You have to know where you're going. You have to sit down and just focus, plan what you're doing, and learn from your mistakes, and then keep going, keep trying again and again, and it'll make you a better animator, definitely. So this is a 1930s style character, a chili pepper. So I'm going to be animating her dancing the merengue. This is just, it's not a key, it's just a design drawing. So usually what I do is I overlay my first paper over the design drawing and I draw my key. Before I start, I usually do my timing charts and my thumbnails just to figure out how her poses are going to be. And I use the thumbnails as a reference of what I'm doing with the main line and how the character is going to be designed. So I start with the main line, which is the line of energy that's flowing through the character. As you can see here, she's going to be very sultry, so it's a very nice S-curve. And then once that's done, I try and draw very simple shapes. So for her head, for her shoulders, and for her hips, where those are going. And then very simple shapes for her legs, just going like this. I drew a little grid on the ground just to ground her so that we know where she's standing. And then very, very rough arms. Because this is a dance that involves the arms, I sometimes don't animate the arms right off the bat. So this would be the first phase. I wouldn't add any more details than that, and that would be my first key, key 1. And then I draw the second key over it. So this is when I start flipping backwards and forwards. And the S-curve is actually reversed for this one. So the line of action is going backwards and forwards. And that's what's amazing about 2D animation, is you can see the line of action moving right off the bat, and you know that your movement is going to be working. So then the shoulders are going to be doing the opposite. Going to be going this way with the head. And then the hips are going to be moving the opposite way. And this foot is bent, so now this foot is going to be bent. And then this one, again, grid. Make sure she's standing on something. And then the arms are going to be doing the opposite. So this one's here. This one's overlapping her body. So in 1930s animation, a lot of the time the arms almost is like one noodle connecting through the entire body. So that's something to kind of go back and like make sure that the flow of the arms is really nice and fluid. And there you have it. These are my first 2 keys, and I would actually not go further than this before I do all the in-betweens.